Statement from the Commission, from Commissioner Lenarčič. The floor is yours, please.
Madam President, honourable members of the European Parliament, I would like to thank the European Parliament, also on behalf of High Representative Borrell, for convening this session. Lebanon is a fragile country, gravely weakened by multiple crises and at the risk of being further destabilized by Israeli operations, which would also have wider repercussions on the region and beyond. The civilian population of Lebanon is paying the highest price. The country is facing the most devastating conflict in a generation, with almost 2,500 people dead. 1 in 5 Lebanese displaced, and with 43% of the displaced being children. The lack of space in shelters, disrupted education, numerous attacks on healthcare facilities, increasing number of deaths among health and other relief workers, and a high risk of disease outbreak are only some of the elements underlying the need for an immediate de-escalation of this conflict and the ceasefire. Unifil's stabilization role is essential for Lebanon and for Israel, and this role will become even more critical in the perspective of a ceasefire. It is the responsibility of the UN Security Council to define the mandate of Unifil. And according to UN Security Council Resolution 1701, Unifil is supposed to be the only armed force, together with the Lebanese armed forces, to be deployed in the south of Lebanon. The cooperation between Unifil and the Lebanese armed forces has been remarkable so far. The EU is committed to further empowering the Lebanese armed forces and to facilitating their cooperation with Unifil. To this aim, the Council of the EU has recently approved a new assistance measure for the Lebanese armed forces worth 15 million euros under the European Peace Facility. The Lebanese armed forces play a key role in guaranteeing Lebanon's national security, stability and sovereignty, and this is also in the interest of Israel's security. The EU is equally committed to scaling up our humanitarian engagement in Lebanon. Humanitarian needs in Lebanon are huge and increasing by day. There is an imminent need for more humanitarian funding. For this reason, the EU allocated an extra 10 million euros to Lebanon to address the most pressing needs of the conflict-affected populations, both injured and displaced. This includes the provision of health and shelter services. Additional 13 million euros for Lebanon are in the pipeline. This comes on top of the 64 million euros already allocated earlier this year. We have also activated the EU Civil Protection Mechanism to support the Lebanese health sector. A number of member states have already offered medicine and medical equipment. In addition, to support the most vulnerable and displaced population in Lebanon, the Commission has launched the European Humanitarian Air Bridge. So far, 3 flights delivered a total of 105 tons of the EU humanitarian stocks. More flights with life-saving assistance are being scheduled. Mobilization of the humanitarian aid and support to the Lebanese armed forces and Unifil will be among the key objectives of the International Conference on Lebanon that will be held in Paris this Thursday. The EU welcomes this conference, where both High Representative Borrell and I will actively participate. The EU and its member states have always supported Unifil and will continue to do so. The fact that 16 EU member states contribute troops to Unifil speaks for itself. High Representative Borrell visited the Unifil headquarters next to the southern border during his last visit to Lebanon to emphasize this EU support. Unifil's brave decision to remain in the field in the face of threats against it deserves our political support, recognition and respect from all of us. This is crucial for the credibility and the security of multilateral peacekeeping operations, but also for the morale of our troops in the field, so that they know that they have our full backing. This point was made very strongly during the European Council last week, and it is clearly reflected in its conclusions. The European Council condemned the attacks by the Israeli Defense Forces against Unifil, which constitute a grave violation of international law and must stop immediately. The European Council also recalled that all actors have an obligation to take necessary measures to ensure the safety and security of UN personnel and property, and to respect the inviolability of UN premises at all times. The European Council also recalled the need to ensure that civilians are protected at all times, that civilian infrastructure is not targeted, and that international law is respected. The recent incidents affecting the civilian population and Unifil only make ceasefire even more urgent. We hear the many voices and declarations within Lebanon now calling for an immediate ceasefire and the deployment of the Lebanese armed forces along the Blue Line. The European Union supports these voices and is ready to continue playing its part. To ensure that ceasefire is credible and efficient, a strong implementing and monitoring mechanism will be needed. As EU, we are confident that Unifil can play this important role. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And we start with the first round of speakers on behalf of the groups, beginning with Mr. Pascual de la Parte for 1 minute and 30 seconds, please.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, President. There is a crisis in Lebanon, a humanitarian crisis, unprecedented, much suffering, many displaced. The country is in entire crisis. That means in the EU we have to look at our diplomatic efforts to come up with a peaceful solution and a ceasefire, an immediate one, so that we put down arms. We need to begin to look at how we can come up with a medium strategic plan for normalization with the prescribed terrorist organization Hezbollah. We cannot negotiate with them. We have to demand the disarmament and dissolution. The armed group, a terrorist, and therefore no negotiation. Moreover, a call for an end to the attacks against Unifil that is deployed by the United Nations in the south of Lebanon to guarantee the life and in physical integrity of our soldiers that are showing their human value and professionalism. We need to look at the mandate of the new mission in that specific area, but for the time being, attacks against Unifil must end, and we as Europeans, we need to use all of our negotiating efforts and bring the humanitarian aid to Lebanon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Maniatis for 1 minute, please.
Αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, στη Γάζα πάνω από 42.000 άνθρωποι.
Dear colleagues, 42,000 people killed in Gaza, a lot of women and children who have lost their lives, 2,500 people in Lebanon, 1.2 million civilians who have been displaced, who have had to leave their houses. The problems are so serious that the Lebanese government has asked for aid from Europe, from our peace facility, to deal with these acute humanitarian needs due to the war. Israel has the right to defend itself and to protect its citizens, but that does not mean that they can violate international law and bomb other countries and to displace citizens from other countries or to impede humanitarian access getting to Gaza. UN peacekeepers cannot be attacked and the UN Secretary General cannot be criticised in this way. We need to end this vicious cycle. The war in Gaza must end and people must be able to return home.
And 30 seconds, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, the 10th of October 2024, the blue helmets in Lebanon were the target of deliberate firing by Israel. No democracy can tolerate that sort of thing. Israel was fighting a legitimate fight against Islamic terrorism, and that is legitimate within the scope of international law. Israel has been aiming to neutralize Hezbollah, which has been spreading terror and poverty in Lebanon. No French person can remain indifferent to the suffering and economic and financial challenges, democratic and civilizational challenges faced by Lebanon. The history of Lebanon is that of the Middle East. Every conflict has an effect on Lebanon. In October 1943, Hezbollah Islamists during the civil war killed innocent French people. It is vital for civilians and civilian infrastructure to be spared. France has a role to play and a history. French diplomacy can and should be used given the effects of the conflicts in the Middle East on Europe and on France. Peace, peace, peace has to be the aim, but for that to be achieved, Lebanon has to regain sovereignty over its territory, and we need to see the elimination of the terrorists on its territory.
1 minute, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, and colleagues. Giorgia Meloni was the first European leader to go to Lebanon in these days. She did it immediately following the unacceptable attack of the IDF against our soldiers. We all need to recall respect for the Unifil troops, their security, and the mandate of 1701 of the UN. If needed, we will strengthen Unifil with new rules to contribute to disarm Hezbollah in this strip of land. Following the killing of Sinwar, it is time for a ceasefire in Gaza and a release of the Israeli hostages still in the hands of Hamas. Moreover, the EU should take charge of not just the displaced in Lebanon, but also the Syrian displaced, and make sure that we stem a new influx of migrants that with the new rules we would not be able to manage.
Speaker is Mr. Grüttler for 1 minute, please.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, Commissioner, dear colleagues, I have a feeling of déjà vu today. Still, there is no declaration from the European Parliament about the situation in Lebanon, about the attack on UN peacekeepers or Lebanese civilians. There are enormous humanitarian needs. There are 6 hospitals that have had to close in the south of Hezbollah. There are cases of cholera amongst the 800,000 displaced people. How can we as Europeans not officially act through the European Parliament. We have UN peacekeepers being targeted by Israeli bombings. This is a violation of international law, and everybody knows this. All of us, all of the colleagues here present. So what are we waiting for? We need to take a position, at the very least, a resolution from the European Parliament. We need to send assistance. We need to send medicines to Lebanon. We need to help the UN be able to comply with its role to protect those in Beirut. It should be somewhere neutral and accessible, and we need an immediate ceasefire. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Orlando for 1 minute and 30 seconds, please.
Signora Presidente.
Madam President, it is unacceptable, the military aggression against the UN peacekeepers as a part of Unifil. It is not a mistake in a war operation, but a deliberate violation of UNSC Resolution 1701. And under these conditions, these need to be respected by Hezbollah. There was a serious statement by Netanyahu that has declared UN Secretary General Guterres persona non grata, and the statements against the UN are unacceptable. They have a fundamental role to play for peace and development around the world. Israel has the right to defend itself, but it must defend international law, and war crimes and any type of genocide must be denounced. Now, the immediate ceasefire must be accepted and promoted. The UN rules, the only international organization that can assist in the geopolitical context. We call on the Commission for specific reference in the aggression against Unifil to censor the Israeli government's actions and to strengthen the presence of the UN in Lebanon and throughout the Middle East, to guarantee humanitarian aid, a ceasefire, and to prevent any escalation that could add insult to injury to the Gaza tragedy in Lebanon. Thank you.
Very much. Next speaker is Ms. Boylan for 1 minute and 30 seconds, please.
We meet yet again to discuss Israel's escalating assault on Lebanon and the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And the EU must now reckon with its own ethical and moral failures, because it has been business as usual with the Israeli government as they have engaged in the most egregious breaches of international law. And yes, last week the European Council condemned the attack on Unifil, but the question is, who attacked Unifil? It was the IDF who attacked them, and it was deliberate. As an Irish MEP, I want to express concern for the 379 Irish soldiers in Unifil and commend them for their bravery. The EU remains the largest trading partner of a country that violates human rights on a daily basis, that deliberately targets UN personnel, that wages an escalating campaign of brutality in North Gaza. How have we reached a point where burning patients alive in their hospital beds is not a red line for the EU? Where is the EU's moral compass? This week we will see shameful attacks in this House, attempts to attack and undermine UNRWA, the last lifeline for the Palestinian people. UNRWA provides essential services including education, healthcare and support for 5.9 million refugees. And I can tell you now, the public are on the right side of history. They have taken to the streets to demand sanctions, to demand the application of international law and for a permanent ceasefire. So now, no more double standards, no more impunity and no more hypocrisy from European leaders.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Frölich for 1 minute, please.
Frau Präsidentin,
Madam President, the Hamas attack on Israel should be condemned. And of course, Israel has the right to self-defense, but Israel does not have the right to reduce the Middle East to ashes. In Lebanon, patients are burning, women and children are dying, villages are being destroyed, and UN troops are being attacked. This is not self-defense anymore. This is hell on earth. This is war crimes. A ceasefire is necessary. That means stop sending arms to Israel. Sending arms to Israel is hypocrisy. More weapons means more terror, more people fleeing. Italy has understood, France has understood, Germany has not. 70% of Germans are against. Please listen to your own people. Diplomacy, not escalation. A two-state solution and peace in the Middle East are necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I will open up for the blue card. Next speaker is Mr. Castillo for 1 minute, please.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, dear colleagues, by attacking Israel on the 8th of October 2023, Hezbollah became responsible for the war that has now plunged the Lebanese people into torment. The security of Israel is non-negotiable, and the security of Lebanon either. As the chair of the delegation for the Mashrek countries, I would like to express my deep concern when we look at the recent attack on the Unifil UN mission in Lebanon that injured UN peacekeepers. This is an unacceptable violation of international law. These actions must end. I call for an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon and a resumption of dialogue based on UN Resolution 1701 from the United Nations Security Council. Peace will only come through the disarmament of Hezbollah. When we look at those killed, there's also the displacement of around 1 million civilians in Lebanon. It is important to have our humanitarian and civilian assistance to Lebanon. We need to help them find political and economic stability again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Zingaretti for 1 minute, please.
Cara Presidente.
President, in Lebanon, Europe is present, but what lacks is the consistency of the government. And what we've done the best over the course of our history was when we were able to move beyond the selfishness of national interests and look for the collective. Now, we have to look at what's happening in Gaza and Lebanon, where there's an escalation that threatens the fundamentals of international law, the entire system. The attack against Unifil, Netanyahu government wanted this, has this risk, and we need to condemn it. Europeans must shift gear and find the mechanisms to strengthen a common foreign policy to have an impact. Now, the EU initiative for peace at the highest level must be undertaken. Israeli hostages must be released, a ceasefire in Lebanon and in Gaza, and a diplomatic process for a political structure, the only way that we can have lasting peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Steutela for 1 minute, please.
Dank u wel, voorzitter. Sinds resolutie 1701 van 2006...
Madam President, under Resolution 17/2001, the blue helmets were supposed to monitor the blue line. Unifil was not to take military action and was to stop Hezbollah and Israel taking military action. However, Hezbollah started firing rockets at Israel right beside the UN bases. They also had arms dumps in the so-called blue zone, which was supposed to have been controlled by the UN, not Hezbollah. Hezbollah is suffering defeat. Lebanon is in flames. And, however, Unifil should not be suffering from the action taken against Hezbollah.
Dank u wel, voorzitter. Geachte collega's, geachte meneer de commissaris.
Thank you very much, President, colleagues, Commissioner. We have the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, which talks about freeing Lebanon from the forces of Hezbollah. Unfortunately, there are many Hezbollah fighters that are stationed in Lebanon, and Unifil has simply stood by and watched. That is why Israel was forced to attack, because of the attacks on the 7th of October. Now, obviously, direct conflict with Unifil should be avoided. The civilian population must be protected by the UN peacekeepers, but not the Hezbollah fighters. If they get in the way of the fight with Hezbollah, then this is the wrong way round. We need to be able to successfully tackle the problem with Hezbollah and to stop weapons coming from Iran. That would really be a service to the people.
Please.
Dank u wel, mevrouw de voorzitter, collega's.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, Europe this month earmarked emergency aid to Lebanon, $1 billion in total. But yet nothing has changed, colleagues. And there were 13 million just this month. The situation has got worse. The European Union should have a policy. It can't just be an assistance program. Everyone can earmark money, but where is our strategy to raise Lebanon up? What is our support to fight corruption and Iranian influence? What is our effort to stabilize the country? Unifil must be strengthened. It shouldn't just be withdrawn. The peacekeepers cannot be weakened. Do you remember what happened in Rwanda? 10 Belgian peacekeepers were killed. There was a withdrawal and then a genocide. So let us do everything to strengthen the peacekeepers, defend them. That is necessary to guarantee peace there and also here.
Ms. Neumann, for 1 minute, please.
Dear colleagues, we are safe and free from repression here, and this is a privilege. I said this last session, and I might have to say it again next session. We all have a choice to make about how we use this privilege. Will we continue to play into the hands of terrorists and warmongers, accusing each other of anti-Semitism or double standards, using symbols and rhetoric merely to provoke, echoing the deep divisions and escalation in the Middle East? Or will we rise above it? Will we try to understand, to use the different perspectives we have inherited, the deep ties we have with one side or the others, as a shared resource to build the bridges so desperately needed? Dear colleagues, beyond the zero-sum game of brutality and retaliation, there are so many people in Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Iran, desperately yearning for peace. But if we, secure in this chamber, can't even bridge our divides, how do we expect them to do so?
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Della Valle for 1 minute, please.
Ancora una volta la maggioranza.
Yet again, the majority in this parliament is showing the world its double standard and its complicity. We are being asked to vote on a resolution that says nothing against the Iranian government. Targeting Unifil targets the UN, Italian soldiers, and European soldiers in a peacekeeping mission. The Israeli idea is clear. They don't want any witness to war crimes. Last week, the EU expressed its concern about this action, and yet Israel took down a Unifil structure. So if you look at the Gazan casualties, 40,000, hundreds in Lebanon, and now we have the Unifil and its Italian soldiers. What will it take for the EU to put an end to the double standard and hypocrisy and to stand on the side of the UN, the Palestinians and the Lebanese, and the ICC mandate? And we need to be able to support the International Court and its stipulation.
Di Meo for 1 minute, please.
Grazie, Presidente, signor Commissario.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. The war that is unfolding in Lebanon is of great concern, and there's a threat that it would extend to the rest of the region. No doubt, the 7th of October Hamas attack means that Israel can defend itself, but it must be carried out pursuant to international humanitarian law. Therefore, the attack against Unifil must be condemned firmly because it puts at risk not just our UN personnel, but also the fragile stability in the region. The Hamas attack means that we have to work now in a determined way for a ceasefire and a de-escalation with all diplomatic channels. That is why Tajani, foreign secretary, went to the region to look for a lasting ceasefire, two-state solution with two people where they can live in peace and security. That is the only way that we can uphold a long and lasting peace.
Yes, Ms. Ince for 1 minute, please.
Colleagues, this show in here unfolds a tragic scene. The name Gaza is being systematically erased from titles of the debate by the right-wing and the far-right factions in here. Meanwhile, horrors erupt in front of our eyes, children of Gaza in anguish. Their cries fill the air and they are burned alive. This is a nightmare created by humans and that the history really will tell about. No refuge remains, not even the hospitals. Even there, the world watched them burned alive. Shaban al-Dalu was one of their names. How many must suffer? How many must die? Palestinian souls, Lebanese in need, humanitarians striving, journalists bold, UN peacekeepers, and many stories are yet untold. I turn to EPP, ECR, Patriot, and ECN. Tell me, how many must be killed before you let go of the hands of Netanyahu and your empathy rises for the Palestinians and Lebanese also? How many must die before you can say ceasefire now for the people of Israel, Lebanon, and Gaza too? The greater the number, the less is your humanity.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Tetch for 1 minute, please. Oh, there is a blue card. Ms. Ince, do you want to take it? Oh, it is a point of order. Okay, please.
Kiitoksia, arvoisa puhemies.
Thank you, Madam President. I should like you to take a look at seat 457. He has a QR code on his shirt, and when he's filmed, that QR code leads to a Palestinian web page. I do wonder, Madam President, is it permitted in this House to use, to wear shirts or other clothing with political messaging?
Thank you very much. We will take note of that. And it's true that it's not allowed to expose political messages on your clothes. So please respect that, colleagues. Next speaker is Mr. Terch. For 1 minute, please.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Tras un año de guerra provocada por Hamas, Hezbollah.
After a year of war provoked by Hezbollah, after huge tragedies because terrorists always hide amongst the civilian population. You have those who led the attacks against Israel who have been killed now. So it is an opportunity now for a stable peace in Lebanon and in the region. In the end, to end this, we have to end Hezbollah's taking hostage of Lebanon. Unifil were sent there in order to disarm Hezbollah, but now we see Hezbollah waging an open war. Peace does not exist for the moment. That has to be put in place. Some people want to impede that, it seems. They seem to want to just create more animosity against Israel. And it seems that Unifil are now perhaps unwittingly protecting Hezbollah from the Israeli attacks. Those peacekeepers, including Spanish peacekeepers, have to be withdrawn immediately. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Grossetto for 1 minute, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, now we have just concluded an important meeting of the G7 on defense where there was a request to support the Unifil mission in Lebanon, and we would endorse that. When it comes to Unifil, it is the only tangible commitment for implementation of UNSC Resolution 1701, and we condemn also the attack of Iran on Israel and condemn Hamas and Hezbollah terrorist organizations. We defend the right to Israel to exist in any attack. The problem isn't Israel, but it's Islamic fundamentalism and terrorism. But we have to recognize the fact that attacks against UN missions runs counter to international law, and we call then to accountability Israel. When it comes to Unifil must be able to have a deterrent effect. Anything else would sap the UN's credibility. The only way to resolve controversy is deny the right of multilateral organizations to continue to exist. Thank you.
Next speaker is Mr. Kelleher for 1 minute, please.
At this very moment, Israeli Defence Force personnel are actively putting the lives of Unifil peacekeepers at risk in South Lebanon with their deliberate actions. Soldiers from 16 EU member states form part of Unifil, with my own country contributing just under 400 troops at present. Members of Uglig Naharan have served continuously since 1978 in Unifil, and sadly 48 of our soldiers have lost their lives while wearing the UN Blue Beret in Lebanon. It's a sad situation, colleagues, where munitions sold by EU member states to Israel are now being fired at the very own soldiers working under Unifil in the Blue Beret. What's worse, the vast majority of member states are silent on Israel's actions in South Lebanon and indeed in Gaza. The EU talks a lot about the rule of law, yet one country, Israel, gets a free pass for its actions despite them being contrary to international law, cited by the International Court of Justice, breaching UN resolutions and UN Charter, Article 2 of the EU-Israeli Trade Association Agreement, and crucially, basic human decency. The EU must once again become an honest broker in the Middle East peace process. We need to promote the two-state solution, and we need a ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the hostages, and an immediate ceasefire as well in South Lebanon to ensure there is no more risk to Unifil troops. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Satouri for 1 minute, please.
Madame la Présidente, chers collègues.
Madam President, colleagues, it is unacceptable for Israel to violate Lebanon's sovereignty. It is necessary for war crimes to be combated through the judiciary. No one has the right to dispense justice themselves. Repeated Israeli attacks are devastating Lebanese society and destroying every day a little bit more a country that's already on its knees. We cannot be indifferent to the fate of this country, this region, and the fact that our Unifil troops are in danger. it is vital to stand up for the United Nations. The United Nations is there to ensure that populations can live in peace and dignity. The Israeli government, Netanyahu, should not be allowed to trample on everything that the international community has built up over the years in the interest of peace.
Montero, but before I give you the floor, you have to take off your scarf, please. Thank you.
Señora Presidenta, las normas internacionales también impiden.
Madam President, international standards are there to stop genocides, but here Europe is supporting one. Why, Commissioner, do you continue to support someone who is perpetrating genocide? It is an invasion. It is a genocide. Europe needs to stop selling weapons and allowing the transit of weapons to those people. We need to break our trade agreement and then Israel would stop the killing of people in Gaza and in Lebanon. This is an act of war, and these people have done nothing. You need to call a genocide. You need to stop the Zionist propaganda that Israel has the right to defend itself. The terrorist state of Israel will then stop bombing schools and hospitals and refugee camps. They will have to stop using white phosphorus in Lebanon, attacking people in hospitals. Commissioner, this is the barbarous situation we are witnessing, and none of you can say that you didn't know. What is the use of Europe if you allow human dignity to be trampled in this way? There should be a full embargo on weapons and breaking ties with Israel, otherwise you are complicit.
Before I give the floor to the next speaker, I have a point of order from Ms. Sorel. Please, the floor is yours.
Le monde aujourd'hui.
The world today is bubbling over, and with war, I think we should be wiser, have more modesty, and I'd like to call on the President to make sure that our rules of procedure be respected. We cannot wear political signs, and the Palestinian scarf should not be allowed in this hemicycle, and it shouldn't just be set down. So, Madam President, no more political symbols. As members of this parliament, we have to set the example. We need to use a cool head. We're talking about the life and death of citizens around the world. So let us respect. I demand that we respect no Palestinian scarves in the hemicycle.
Thank you very much for that. I agree that if you're here and speaker at the speaker's place, then you're not allowed to expose political messages. That's the way I've tried to, rule the debate. And the next speaker is Ms. Sofko for 1 minute, please.
Right. Firstly, I would like to say I sympathize with victims or injured in an attack on Unifil mission. But above all, we have to understand finally that securing Lebanon and especially southern border can be only assured if Hezbollah withdraws its forces from the area and in accordance with UN Resolution 1701. Lebanese have to take responsibilities. They have to elect their president that is being hijacked by Hezbollah again, the political wing. And we have to support them in order to make their army to be able to guarantee the security of the borders as it was. Resolution 1701 was never respected. It's dead. It's the end. And I welcome the decision not to renew the mandate of Croatian soldiers that were there, to pull them back. UN Security Council has to reconsider who is defending and who is observing these borders and this resolution. We have to discuss this issue and not to lose our times here spreading political messages. Thank you.
The next speaker is Ms. Pahin for 1 minute, please.
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President. I too should like to call on our values and ideas, but the fundamental values and ideas that we built the EU on, and with the situation in Gaza, and we have to call on our basic humanity. And once and for all, we must condemn the violation of international humanitarian law. Ladies and gentlemen, the evacuation requests of Israel do not conform to international law, and the attacks against the peacekeepers are a violation of international law. What is happening in Lebanon must be denounced and must end. We have more than 1,000 dead, more than 1 million displaced. Hunger and cholera are back in Lebanon. We need more humanitarian aid and access. We need humanitarian corridors. Put an end to this barbarism. We must be up to this task, so we call on the Commission that it be so we can look into our children's eyes in the future.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Knotek for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam President. We shall not mix cause and consequence. And in this debate, you focus too much on the consequence. So let's be honest. One of the root causes is that simply Unifil failed to help to protect the people of Lebanon from Hezbollah as such. Unifil even failed to protect our own closest neighborhood from presence of those terrorists. So what we are debating today. And also, to be honest, Hezbollah is supported by Iran and represent a threat not only to people of Lebanon but also to Israel. So Israel as well as Ukraine, we debated in the topic before, they do only what is necessary. They protect themselves. So, ladies and gentlemen, it would be application of double standards. If we ask now Israel for a ceasefire, we do not do it for Ukraine and don't do it for Israel. Thank you.
Mr. Knotek, there is a blue card. Do you want to take it? Ms. Insia?
Madam President, I'm a bit shocked at what was just said. Am I understanding it correct that the colleague from the far right bench of this parliament is saying that it is okay for Israel to attack the UN blue helmets, to attack Unifil? Is that correct?
Mr. Knotek?
Madam colleague, you should be careful when people are talking or go back to school, because I didn't say at all something like this. Israel protected, please, I let your 30 seconds, let my 30 seconds. Israel protected Israel, and it's a problem of Unifil that they were not careful, because close to their stations and positions there were terrorists, so maybe they have not been doing the correct work. That's it. So please do not say things that I have not mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Mr. Madison for 1 minute, please.
Thanks so much, Mr. President, dear colleagues. First of all, about the facts. The fact is that from the Lebanon territory, Hezbollah has attacked Israel since the last year, October, is the fact. They have been supporting Hamas. Hamas has been supported by the very many Palestinians and probably also by the many very left-wing colleagues here. So they are destroying the ideology that we need to destroy Israel. What is the fact? The UN peacekeepers, they were warned that they are sitting next to the bases of Hezbollah. They were sitting next to there, they were warned, and now the General Secretary of the UN is visiting Russia to meet with Vladimir Putin on the BRICS summit. That's fine for you, of course. So the problem now is there are a lot of hypocrisy. Left-wing radicals are, of course, supporting, with the EU funds, has been deported to Hamas in Palestine. This money has been used for supporting the Islamic terrorists to kill Jews and to destroy the peace there. We know the facts that Hamas is working together with Hezbollah in Lebanon, with Russia, with Iran and North Korea. That is the side of the evil. But we are standing on the good side to destroy the terrorists and to find a peace finally. Thank you.
Mr. Madison, there is a blue card. Do you want to take it? It's Mr. Andrews, seat 140.
Thank you, Madam President. Is the Speaker aware of the widespread reports that the Israeli government for many years supported Hamas and facilitated financial support to Hamas through third-party countries, in order to undermine the Palestinian Authority. How does he reconcile that fact with the statements he's just made to the hemicycle?
Actually, to talk about the big senses they have been supporting in history sometimes, we know it's just now the facts. Recently, in the last years, the EU taxpayers' money have been used by Hamas to force the terrorism against Israel. That's the fact in the last recent years. We know it, who are on the good side, who are on the bad side. If we don't look on the facts, that actually who are working together, you are also supporting terrorism. And that's the problem. You are then also supporting the Russian terrorism against Ukraine. You are supporting North Korea because they are working all together there. And that's why I really don't believe that there will be peace without destroying the terrorists. And the Israel has to win with the good sides. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then we go back to the original speakers list, and I will give the floor to Mr. Joveva for 1 minute, please.
Thank you. Wow. The escalation of conflict in the Middle East is horrifying. But who is really to blame? Every day, another attack. Every day, tens of civilians dead. Another hospital bombed. Displaced people seeking refuge still become targets in bombed and burned shelters. Population of Palestine, Gaza. Population of Lebanon. Even Unifil peacekeepers have nowhere to hide from bombs, destruction, mayhem. People are being burned to death, blown to pieces, and shot every day in this war. For more than a year, we have been watching the breakdown of humanity, sending Israel weapons and supporting them with our trade deals. Meanwhile, much like a wildfire, the war has been spreading throughout the region. For far too long, we have tolerated Israeli actions, which only encouraged more brutality. Of course, Netanyahu is to blame, but so are we, or you. We need to cease support for Israel, cease weapon supply, and cease our trade deals, and only then we will have ceasefire. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Asant Yudra for 1 minute, please.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, President. I had a speech prepared, but I'm going to say something else. Commissioner, this morning I've been listening to arguments for why we need to support Ukraine for its people, and we agree on that, but we need to say the truth. The truth is this is hypocritical to support Ukraine and not support Palestine or Lebanon. The borders of Ukraine are as important as the borders of Lebanon and Palestine. This is hypocrisy. If we sanction Putin, why do we not sanction Netanyahu? We need to apply the same approach for Ukraine as with Palestine and Lebanon. This is hypocrisy, international hypocrisy. We've decided to accept UN resolutions, and the ICJ rulings in relation to The Hague, in relation to Russia. Why do we not do the same thing with Israel and Palestine? How long will we continue to be complicit as our hands are dripping in blood?
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Flanagan for 1 minute, please.
Looking at the title of the debate, I'm wondering, is there a limitation to the amount of text that you can put on the screen? It says, urgent need for ceasefire in Lebanon and for safeguarding the Unifil mission in the light of recent attacks. I'll finish it off for you. By Israel using weapons provided by Germany and the United States of America. There will be no ceasefire so long as Israel has an endless supply of weapons. At this stage, I don't expect any better from the United States of America. In fact, I hear their Secretary of State, Blinken, is going there today to try and breathe new life into the possibility of a ceasefire. Those words make me sick because they're not serious. But Germany, the country that keeps saying they will never forget the genocide during the Second World War, I do expect better from you. But still, you're supplying them with 30% of their weapons. You've got to stop this, because the reality is You seem to have forgotten, but the rest of the world hasn't forgotten, and we won't forget this either. Stop it now. Stop providing the instruments of death.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Ms. Teodorescu Move for 1 minute, please.
Tack talman, kommissionär Lenarčić. Jag undrar hur det kommer.
President, Commissioner, I ask myself how Hezbollah was in a position to attack Israel. There were sirens going off in Israel at the time, and Unifil, for a long time, has not followed its mandate under Resolution 1701, which is to disarm Hezbollah. How is it possible for Hezbollah to be building bunkers and tunnels and weapons depots when Unifil is present? How did they manage to fire rockets at Israel? Why is Unifil operating as a human shield? Israel is now doing what the UN didn't manage because they are incompetent. And the EU should label Hezbollah as a terrorist organization and also take a look at the fact that Iran is destabilizing the entire region. We need to put an end to this terror. It doesn't matter whether it comes from Lebanon, Israel or Palestine, and we need to make sure that Israel is supported in their endeavors. Only that way can we have peace.
Dear colleagues, what is happening in Lebanon and in Gaza must shock us. With impunity, Israel is daily committing war crimes. While rejecting peace, Netanyahu got what he wanted, a regional war and destabilized neighbors. He turned the regional region into his playground. In the strongest terms, I condemn Israel's attack on EU peacekeeping mission and civilian infrastructure. So, dear colleagues, I ask you, when did we accept that it is okay to bomb a school just because a shooter is hiding inside? So I have this message for a certain EU minister. A civilian can never be, and I stress, is never, a legitimate target. People in Lebanon are desperate. They urgently need our help. We must immediately open a humanitarian breach. The country is on the verge of collapsing. I join calls for implementation of the UN Resolution 1701. We need an immediate ceasefire. We need peace now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Hulveni for 1 minute, please.
Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, I, as a former leader of the election mission in 2020, I can say that the Lebanese situation is completely hopeless. This conflict was to be expected, but neither the international community nor the Lebanese political elite were able to handle this situation. There was a stalemate within Lebanon, and there has been no precedent for 2 years in Lebanon. They have been exposed to a conflict aroused by Hezbollah. There is a balance of power between the Shiite forces and the rest of the country. The countries that have influence in Lebanon, and that includes France, must do more to deal with the situation. They must handle the humanitarian crisis. The UN peacekeepers mission is important in line with the Security Council resolution. Lebanon will only be able to stand with the help of international aid.
Andrews for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner and colleagues. Israel's ambassador to the UN last week said, and I quote, "Hezbollah is using Unifil outposts as hiding places." This is patently false. The truth is that the IDF has continuously and flagrantly violated international law, drawing condemnation from the US, from the UK, France, Germany and Italy in a rare show of moral enlightenment. Yesterday, an Israeli bulldozer deliberately demolished an observation tower at a UN position. Last week, 2 Israeli tanks destroyed the main gate of another UN position. Many UN peacekeepers have been injured. So let me take this opportunity to commend the bravery and integrity of UN peacekeepers drawn from 16 member states. Under intense pressure, they have held the line, carried out route clearances and managed to resupply vulnerable positions, which really underlies how difficult humanitarian access is in the rest of the region. I am struck by the near unanimity in this House for once condemning the actions of the IDF, and I hope this message is heard clearly by the IDF and especially by those Unifil troops to help them to endure the hardships brought about by the current conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Andrews, there's a blue card. Do you want to accept it? Mr. Flanagan, blue card.
MEP Andrews, you talk good talk in here, and what you said earlier was very good and very interesting. But I find it hard to square that with the fact that you're part of a government in Ireland that facilitates US warplanes landing at Shannon, facilitates weapons being transported through our airspace. And while that continues, do you not think you are a hypocrite coming in here saying you're defending the people in the Middle East when your government is actually facilitating them being shot in the head?
Mr. Andrews.
Well, I don't have time to go through your own voting record on human rights issues, but let me restate that the Irish government was one of the first to recognise the State of Palestine, has continuously insisted on the support of UNRWA, has demanded that there be a review of the EU-Israel trade agreement, and has been foursquare standing by the people of Palestine against Israeli aggression. And this is recognised not only by UNRWA, but the people of Palestine, and they have very much acknowledged and recognised the commitment of the Irish government in this very, very difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, since we soon have to vote, I have now closed the opportunity to make a blue card. The next speaker is Ms. Galán for 1 minute, please.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, President. Well, Lebanon has always been a welcoming country, and I myself experienced that when I worked in the refugee camps in Lebanon. It's got a population of over 6 million, but it has welcomed over 2 million refugees in a solidarity-based manner. And these are refugees that are once again being obliged to flee, this time accompanied by the rest of the civilian population. Israel acts with impunity against everyone, also against ourselves. It first called for the withdrawal of Unifil forces, and when the UN refused, it simply attacked those bases, their bases. So it has attacked, essentially, international law. What it's been doing in Lebanon is the same thing that it did with UNRWA. Netanyahu wants to avoid any criticism of his genocidal policy, any witnesses. So, Commissioner, until which point are we going to allow these massacres? Our statements don't avoid war crimes or massacres. We need to stop the sale of weapons and suspend the association agreement with Israel immediately. Let's sanction Israel. There are no excuses. We need to treat Israel as we treat Russia. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Stier for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, President. As the international conference in Paris approaches, we need to stress the importance of the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1701. This is important not only to achieve ceasefire, but also to achieve permanent peace. If we want to achieve that, we have to support the full implementation of this UN resolution in order to ensure full territorial integrity of Lebanon and in order to disarm Hezbollah, which is a terrorist organization, and we should treat it that way. If we want to protect civilians in Lebanon, in Israel, and Christian Maronites, we shouldn't forget about them, and we should protect them as well. We need to seek support which should be reflected in the full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701. And this resolution requires disarming Hezbollah, which represents a security threat to Lebanon and Israel. Thank you.
Minute, please.
President, Commissioner, the war in the Middle East is getting worse on a daily basis. It's now spread to Lebanon, where Israel's bombing have forced 1.2 million people to leave their homes. Last week, we saw an attack from the Israel military on UN peacekeepers. This is proof, once again, of what is at stake in the Middle East. This is a tragic war, but this is now a deliberate attack on the UN order, on the UN and on its peacekeepers. That's why we continue to call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the West Bank and Lebanon. And we need to respect international humanitarian laws, and we want to see the recognition of Palestine as a condition for negotiation for peace in the region and for dismantling terrorist groups. And that's why we insist that we use the tools we have available to us. We need to suspend the association agreement between the EU and Israel. We need to stop trading with settlements.
I did close the blue card earlier on because of the speaking time. Thanks.
Since Israel's invasion of Lebanon, not only has more devastation been brought on the world, but also another offensive against the rules-based order, which the United Nations has worked to protect since the Second World War. Unifil are not in southern Lebanon to attack anyone. They are a force mandated by the UN to keep the peace. Yet, as we have seen, peaceful or UN do not necessarily qualify as exemptions to Israel's reconnaissance by fire. There are 380 Irish peacekeepers on the front line in South Lebanon with this mission. And over the last 46 years, over 30,000 Irish peacekeepers have been stationed there, engaging in humanitarian activities. Their impact is such that the people speak English in an Irish accent as strong as mine. We must commend to the highest possible degree the peacekeepers for their commitment to their mission in ever-challenging circumstances and for their bravery against the IDF, who have threatened them and injured their colleagues.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. O'Riordan for 1 minute, please.
What more will it take for the EU to sanction Israel? Israel has turned Gaza into a sea of rubble. It is engaging in the indiscriminate bombing of Lebanon. Now it has threatened the Unifil mandate in Lebanon and even attacked UN troops and property. Of course, this disregard for the mandate of the UN by the Israeli government is nothing new. For years, Israel has sought to undermine the EU Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA. UNRWA is the only last lifeline for Palestinians in Gaza. For many, they are the only source of food, shelter and access to healthcare. And UNRWA is the only hope we have to start education for over 650,000 children in Gaza, the children that Israel has not gotten around to murder yet. Without UNRWA, an entire generation will be lost to this conflict. I want to say to those on the right of this House who want to do Netanyahu's dirty work by defunding UNRWA, it is shameful what you are doing. History will surely curse you. Ireland stands with Palestine and Ireland stands with UNRWA.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Mantle for 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, Commissioner, colleagues. Time and again, for more than a year already, in each plenary week of the European Parliament, we have to focus on the Middle East, and that's a tragedy. But it's also necessary that we keep attention up for the ongoing attacks. Terrorism, war and suffering are in the first place citizens. In the case we are discussing today, citizens of Lebanon. Lebanon is not attacking anybody. Lebanon is a battlefield. Lebanon is a battlefield misused by the Iranian mullah regime, just as the Iranian mullah regime misuses its own population for their negative and destructive, harmful purposes. And the Iranian mullah regime is not only using Lebanon as a battlefield, but also Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, as well as Hamas as a terrorist organization, not only against our ally Israel, but against all of us. So let's keep things to be in order and let's seek for peace.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Sanchez Amor for 1 minute, please.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, President. Well, double standards are the cancer of the EU's foreign policy, and we're seeing problems spreading across the world. I think our talk of values basically produces incredulity. I mean, we're acting as the worst kind of Kissinger. We criticize human rights violations in some cases, but not in others. I mean, Netanyahu is clearly violating international law and human rights, but some people see him as a defender of international law and human rights. I mean, it depends who does what, it seems. What Russia does in Ukraine is sanctioned, and there are resolutions crafted about it, but what Israel does in Gaza, etc., is not criticized at all. I mean, here we have got a defenseless population suffering attacks, and there are also attacks on UN forces. There are flagrant, clear attacks going on, and I think we should be looking at reassessing our relationship with Israel. It's not about values, it's about our credibility in the world.
Come to catch the eye. I've received a lot of requests for catch the eye, so I can't take everyone because of the voting time. So I will take one from each group and one from the non-attached. And I will start with Ms. Grappini, please, for 1 minute. The microphone there.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner, colleagues. I think that what's most important, and we've heard it here in this room, is that we need to implement UN Resolution 1701. We have to plead for peace. We may have subjective positions, but our message has to be very clear. Peace. We need to stop the war. So we have to see, of course, how come Hamas and Hezbollah cannot be disarmed? We've had UN missions for so many years. How come we have not managed to stop these terrorists? And I think it was very well said that we need to see what to do about Iran, because Lebanon was in fact attacked by Iran. So we should focus around peace. That should be our united front. And first and foremost, we have to discuss about the UN and about implementing Resolution 1701. We have two war fronts here, and in both cases we need to fight for peace, both in Ukraine and Lebanon.
Speaker from ECR is Mr. Gerdi, seat 429, please.
Thank you. We all speak of respecting the UN decisions, and we denounce attacks against the staff. But let me remind you of the Turkish military attack on Cyprus back in 2023, where the Turkish forces were attacking the peacekeepers. They were threatening to run them over with trucks and other vehicles, causing damages. These were all actions that constitute a very serious crime based on international law. And the reason was, or the pretext was, that they wanted to build a road in a territory that was not theirs. They wanted to extend occupied territory under the pretext of humanitarian reasons. Well, they are the ones responsible for a humanitarian crisis because they were occupying Cyprus. But there was nothing that happened. Everyone's turned a blind eye on them.
I would like to remind colleagues that it's not allowed to show pictures while speaking. The next speaker is on behalf of Renew, Mr. Mololi, seat 649, please.
Thank you, Chair. The horror of the violent onslaught on Gaza is a live TV news event as we speak. Cameras are showing the bombings every hour, and over 40,000 people have already died there. Israel has the right to defend itself, but this is outrageous. It must also respect international law. And in years to come, I wonder what the historians will say about what we did in this House, or what we did not do, perhaps more to the point. And in the middle of it all are 370 Irish soldiers in the 124th Infantry Battalion supporting the Unifil forces there. Young men and women from the Costume Barracks in Athlone, from the Curragh and County Donegal, who have been attacked day after day, the peacekeepers. I spoke to the father of one of these just 20 minutes ago. His son is now in a bunker for more than 40 hours, a peacekeeper under attack. What a disgrace. At the end of the day, what are we going to do about the situation? The father asks us, why are Israel trying to kill his son, a peacekeeper? Ladies and gentlemen, the time for action is long gone. A violation of international law must be punished.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, while entering the chamber, please be quiet and take your seat, please. We're still having the debate. The next speaker will be on behalf of the Green Group, Ms. Miranda Paz, please.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Europe has to call for a ceasefire in Gaza and the south of Lebanon. Commissioner, Europe needs to call for humanitarian corridors. Commissioner, we need to call for international humanitarian law to be complied with. Finally, Commissioner, please fight for peace, fight against this genocide. The situation in Gaza and the south of Lebanon is catastrophic. There are petitions from medical staff who are telling us that there is a catastrophe. Hospitals, schools, cities are all being attacked. We need to go to geopolitics and know that the invasion in Lebanon in 78, in 82, in 2006, and now with this invasion, as a result of the Palestinian cause, and if there was a ceasefire in Gaza, and if there's an end to an occupation as well, then this invasion wouldn't have happened.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is on behalf of the left, Mr. Oliveira, seat 302, please.
Thank you, Madam President. The European Council conclusions and the title of this debate highlight the range of criteria that we use in our complicity with Israel. There's attacks on UN peacekeepers. They should be condemned. This attack on UN peacekeepers is a serious violation of international law, and it was Israel who's responsible for this. The fact that we're not referring to the aggressor here just highlights the complicity of the EU with Israel and with the escalation of this war, with the attacks on Lebanon and the attacks against the Lebanese people. The whole region is being drawn into conflict. For decades, Israel has not been complying with international law. They've been conducting genocide in Palestine. And this is a situation where the majority of the political groups and the president of this House refuse to debate. We need a ceasefire in Lebanon and Gaza. What side is the EU on? Thank you.
Very much. Dear colleagues, we still have a debate going on here in the chamber, so please take your seat and be quiet, please. If you wish to speak, you could go outside. The final speaker in Catch the Eye is Mr. Dostal, seat 843, please. Microphone.
The Unifil mission in Lebanon is pursuant to resolution of the Security Council, and under the UN Charter, everybody has a duty to carry out the decision of Security Council. But 2 weeks ago, Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, and a Green suggested it is now Germany's position that Israeli attacks on civilian centers are acceptable as a matter of self-defense to achieve the goal of destroying terrorists. And the position of Czech government, mostly related to PPE, is similarly shameful. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing in war is black and white, but few things in international law are easier, clearer than the distinction between combatants and non-combatants. And attacking the UN peacekeepers is an abomination which was in the past perpetrated by terrorists, but never by state actors and members of the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why I and 8 other members have submitted a motion calling on Israel to desist from these attacks and to fulfil its obligation under international law. Thanks for everybody in the room supporting this position. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, before I give the floor to the Commission, would you please take your seat, and please do not talk while you're here in the chamber unless you have the floor. And now I will give the floor to the Commission to wrap up. Mr. Commissioner Lenarčič, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, President. Honourable members, I'd like to thank you for the debate that we just held and for the many views expressed. Among them, there are 2 points that I want to refer to and offer some clarification for the benefit of this House as well as for the benefit of the European voters. First, allegation was made that EU funds...
Excuse me, Commissioner. Commissioner, I will please... Dear colleagues, please, we are still having a debate and it is impossible to hear what is being said. So could you please quietly come into the chamber and find your seat and talk afterwards? Please, the floor is yours, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you, President. I appreciate your efforts. Allegation was made that EU funds, EU taxpayers' money, went to Hamas. This is a very crude allegation without any proof, and I want to categorically reject it here. The sources of funding for Hamas are very well known, and they are not in the EU. Second, calls were addressed to the Commission to stop arms exports to Israel. I wish to clarify that military cooperation between EU member states and third countries, including Israel, fall completely outside the EU competence, and the Commission has zero competence in this matter. And this issue would have to be reviewed at the national level. With these 2 clarifications, let me try to summarize, on the basis of the discussion that we held, a few key orientations for the way forward and possibly, just possibly, a way out of the crisis in Lebanon. First, attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure must stop immediately. Second, the Israeli Defense Forces attacks against Unifil must also stop immediately. Third, the EU remains strongly committed to supporting Unifil. Its role will become even more important in the perspective of a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel. And fourth and last, the EU reiterates once again its call for an immediate ceasefire. It actively supports international mediation efforts in this direction and is ready to bring its own contribution to make it possible at the earliest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner Lenarčič. The debate is closed and the sitting will be suspended for a couple of seconds while we're shifting the chair. Thank you very much.